Now, this is talking about people who, this is at the time of Vatican I, this is talking about people who think, well, I can just affirm the Roman Catholic doctrines that I think are ex cathedra. I don't have to listen to the other things. We saw in the EWTN abridged statement that that's not true, but we're going to see even more when we look here. While in truth, we laud these men and do praise because they profess the truth which necessarily arises from their obligation to the Catholic faith. We wish to persuade ourselves that they do not wish to continue the obligation by which Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound. Do you hear that? Theologians, SSPX, writers, people out there, you're absolutely bound not only to the decrees which are set forth in the infallible judgment of the church to be believed, see also 1722, and we persuade ourselves also that they do not wish to declare that the perfect adhesion to revealed truths, which they recognize as absolutely necessary to attain true progress in the sciences and to refute errors, could be obtained if faith and obedience were given only to the dogmas expressly defined. This is the very position they say. I'm only bound by the expressly defined dogmas. For even if it were a matter concerning that subjection which is to be manifested by an act of divine faith, nevertheless it would not have to be limited to those matters which have been defined by express decrees of the ecumenical councils or the Roman pontiffs or the see, but would have been extended also to matters which are handed down as divinely revealed by the ordinary teaching power of the church spread throughout the world. In other words, you are also bound to the ordinary teaching authority, and therefore, by universal and common consent, are held to be Catholic theologians to belong to the faith. So if you want to be a Catholic theologian who belongs to the Catholic faith, you are bound by the ordinary teaching, both the universal ordinary and the ordinary that can be fallible. The universal ordinary cannot err. The ordinary can err, but you're still bound to it if you want to be a Catholic theologian. You could privately dissent if you think ordinary teaching is ordinary non-infallible teaching is an error, but you cannot publicly fight against the hierarchs of the church without ceasing to be Catholic and becoming a schismatic. That's what this is saying. Clearly, right there, 100% condemnation of a gigantic portion of the trad approach, which you hear as a mantra on a daily basis. We're only bound by what the Pope himself and the church dogmatically defines. That literally condemns the position that you're only bound by specific dogmatic definitions. That's dogma. Do you understand? It's not that hard. 1698 is the next one. Let's go down to that. Nor do they, liberal theologians, blush to profess. Now, this is liberalism in the 1800s, right? Openly and publicly the axiom and the principle of heretics, which so many perverse opinions, errors, and rise, for they repeatedly say the ecclesiastic power is not by divine right distinct from and independent from the civil power, and that the distinction and independence of that same could not be preserved without the essential rights of the civil power being invaded and usurped by the church. So it's still about church and state. And we cannot pass over in silence the boldness of those who, not enduring sound doctrine, contend that without sin, and with no loss of Catholic profession, one can withhold assent and obedience to the judgments and decrees. Does it say just the ex cathedra doctrines? Does it say only the ecumenical councils? Does it say I only have to follow ex cathedra statements and dogmas? No. Judgments and decrees and obedience to said judgments and decrees of the apostolic see, whose object is declared to relate to the general good of the church and its rights and disciplines. Rights and disciplines, provided it does not touch the dogmas of faith or morals. So that's the quote. I'm only bound to give assent and judgment to those things. There is no one who does not see and understand clearly how openly and opposed to Catholic teaching this is, and of the plenary power divinely bestowed on the Roman pontiff by Christ himself. So he does not get his power by the councils, by the church, by anybody other than Christ himself. It's direct to feed, rule, and govern the universal church. Again, the non-Catholic theologians who think they're Catholic, literally exactly what 80-90% of the trads and the conservative Novus Ordos think, you're not sinning and you don't lose your faith, quote, if you withhold assent and obedience to judgments and decrees of the apostolic see that you declare to be not correct, right? If it doesn't touch on the dogmas of faith and morals, I don't have to follow it if I judge it to be wrong. You could literally copy and paste this quote from the liberal theologians of the 1800s, and it would be the very copy-paste phrase that 90% of conservative and traditional Catholics literally repeat. I'm only bound by the Pope's dogmatic and dogmatic statements and infallible statements. I'm not bound to decrees, judgments, disciplines. Yes, you are. And there's one more. 1792. Hopefully everybody can see this, right? Is it legible? Can you read it? So again, the point here is not, you may think, this is just refuting Sedevacantists or SSPX. No. Do you understand that a gigantic portion of the Roman Catholic world now believes that they can disagree with Francis as they will? They don't have to accept the teaching of his encyclicals, which is ordinary teaching. Doesn't matter even if it's ordinary universal or ordinary non-universal. It still comes from the Apostolic See with his teaching authority, which is ordinary, which you still owe obedience to, even if you disagree. But if an encyclical expresses the constant teaching of the church, which is totally ambiguous, vague, right? Part of the reason this works is because of the so-called principles that you judge everything by are so vague that they presuppose a standard and a category themselves, right? Which they don't actually give. So this is what allows the Catholics to justify their playing hard and fast with what they have to accept and what they don't have to accept. This is why every different Roman Catholic has a different list, and there is no list of what the actual dogmas are, because this isn't the whole list. This doesn't have canon law in it, and you have to follow canon law, right? The object of faith, further, by defined in Catholic faith, of all those things which must be believed, which are contained in the written word of God tradition, and those proposed by the Church, either in a solemn pronouncement or in her ordinary and universal teaching power, are to be divinely revealed. And that was the quote from Vatican I that we saw earlier. So as we saw in Auctorum Fide, as we see in these at the time of Vatican I, these three examples, you do not have the right, you do not have the authority, you do not have the ability to pick and choose amongst the various teachings, disciplines, decrees, rites, etc., which things you will accept, even with the delineation between so I'm not going to go into Albrecht. He's a waste of time. The guy is a clown. He doesn't, what he does is, and he's done this multiple times, he just says, okay, we'll set up a debate, and then he yells at you for an hour, calls you a clown, a fraud, knowing that you're not going to want to interact with him. And then when he acts like that, and you're like, all right, I'm done interacting with you, then he says you won't debate. I mean, I've shared the tweets multiple times from 2018, 2019, trying to get this guy to do it, and he just postpones. And he says, I've never postponed. I never postpone. Yeah, okay, whatever. I don't have to waste my time on Albrecht. That guy is not worth anybody's time. So he can debate other people, whatever. Anyway, we see then that it's clear, the main point here is that, again, even if you find within these documents, and notice that the principles of ordinary and universal ordinary don't tell you actually, when you're reading through all the documents, what's what. That becomes something that you have to judge, right? That becomes your judgment. But as a fallible layperson, how do I know that I'm correctly putting into what bin they go, right? As I'm reading through an encyclical and I'm saying, oh, this section looks like this is something that the church has always taught. Well, the church has always taught. That's ambiguous, right? And that assumes that you, as the individual Catholic reading the document, knows that that's what the church has always taught. So it doesn't really tell you anything, these kinds of phrases. So essentially, these are useless criteria because they don't tell you exactly what is and isn't dogma. It then becomes your job, reading through the piles of documents, to put them into the right bin. And that begs the question, because the whole purpose of this was, I'm supposed to be exempted from relying on individual interpretation. Oh, really? Catholics don't do this kind of picking and choosing? Catholics don't rely on their own understanding of the text that they're reading, the papal text. And that's why Albrecht and Ibarra and these people don't know anything about epistemology. They can't answer basic epistemological questions. Even Trent Horn, who's about 10 times better than Albrecht, was confused and couldn't answer these questions. Now, we know Albrecht doesn't know anything about philosophy at all, doesn't know anything about epistemology. And so if Trent, who actually has had some classes in those things, can't answer those questions, do you think any of that clown troop can answer epistemological questions? No. And that's why Albrecht thinks that Matt Slick won the debate with Father Deacon. I'm not joking. He tweets that Matt Slick, who says that I know that the scriptures are true because I cried when I read them, he thinks that's an epistemic justification. So that's the tier of person that you're dealing with Albrecht. And so, no, I'm not going to waste my time with somebody who, with no philosophical training at all, totally incoherent ideas about what justification even means, and is just a clown. If we're already debating Trent Horn and people at that level and caliber, and Trent lost, why would I waste my time with a goober who has about 1/10 the education of Trent? Honestly, come on. So the point here is that, as is obvious from the criteria, which there are criteria for this, the different levels of dogma in Roman Catholicism, the criteria don't tell you actually, in fact, what the application to these massive piles of dogmas, of books and encyclicals and decrees actually is. So then it becomes you, the individual Catholic theologian, doing the best you can. I've got piles, stacks, and shelves over here. The Roman Catholic shelf. Okay? Tons of papal, tons of Vatican II documents and decrees. The 2-volume Tanner Alberigo set on the ecumenical councils, thousands of pages. Vatican II itself, 900 pages. Papal encyclicals itself, the set, hundreds of pages, thousands of pages. Within all of those, you're going to find many, many things that qualify as not just ex cathedra, but also universal ordinary and ordinary teaching, which you owe obedience to. Is that not clear from the documents that we've read? Now the individual Catholic is in the same boat as an Orthodox person, and they're in the same boat as a Protestant person. We just have different books we're going through. But you're in no better boat. You're in no epistemically privileged position because you have Pope. Because it doesn't actually tell you, as you're reading through the documents, which sections and teachings in the documents go in which bin. That's up to you. Hope you can figure it out, dude. Good luck. Here is your role-playing game quest map. Good luck. Have fun. Hopefully you can figure it out. Here's your gigantic shelf full of books. Better get to work. So, being the Spurgatron I am, I spent a lot of years on this stupid role-playing quest, LARPing role-playing quest of traditional Roman Catholicism, of winding one's way through all of this nonsense, which was supposed to be, ironically, avoided and solved via the office of the papacy. Does it look like the office of the papacy solves, just take the section of Francis's papacy. Does that look like it's solving for anyone problems in the church? Or is Francis, in fact, splitting the church, running away all of the Latin Mass fans, all the traditional fans, all the most diehard Catholics, the Catholics that would be willing to die for Catholicism? He is pushing out of the church. So the very guy who's supposed to be the foundation stone of the church in terms of the living magisterium, yes, the living magisterium. Magisterium isn't just a list of doctrines. It's a living embodiment in the bishops in communion with the Pope. The Pope is the living magisterium par excellence, and thus, via the Vatican I view, he is the judge of tradition. You don't read through the books and tell him when he's not in accord with tradition. He determines what is the correct interpretation of the tradition. And this is what Roman Catholics don't understand, and what none of the goobers over at Reason and Theology understand. And if they'd had a class or two in semiotics or philosophy of signs and symbols, they would know that texts require interpretations. They don't just mean what they say and say what they mean. That's a Protestant view. Protestants think, I just read the Bible and it means what it says, and it says what it means. The Bible don't require interpretation. And what does the Roman Catholic do? He's no different than the Protestant, because he thinks that I just read the papal decrees. All I got to do is read the papal decrees, Jay. Why can't you just read the papal decrees? That's my Ibarra impression, right? Now, if I start doing Ibarra impressions, this stream is going to be 4 hours, because he do legit talks in 0.5 speed, perhaps 0.1 speed. I don't 0.2 speed, 0.3. I don't know. So again, because they always love to go to the practical point, right? The practical point is that the papacy solves all these practical problems of the Protestant world. But in fact, not only does it not do that, it actually compounds things, because now instead of just reading the book of the Bible, that's the one book. So if I'm Protestant, man, this is the thing I'm trying to decode, right, for my life, to give it meaning and to understand everything. So I've only got a few thousand pages here. Now, if I'm papacy, man, I got to start with just this, which is at least as big as the Bible. And to even understand Denzinger, I'm going to have to read a lot of other books, right? I'm going to have to know a lot about church history. Then I'm going to have to dig into Tanner and Alberigo's 2,000-page history, documents of the ecumenical councils, you see. So I want to know the dogmas. Let's show you these. A lot of people don't even know these exist. Okay, this is the decrees of the ecumenical councils. Okay, by Tanner and Alberigo. This is the official sort of most scholarly Roman Catholic, right? Like $200-300 set that I bought many years ago. This is volume 1. Volume 1. 700 pages, volume 1. Okay. Volume 2. Volume 2 of Tanner and Alberigo. How many pages is that one? 1,329. Okay. So there's 2,000 pages for ecumenical councils. So now, good luck. Better start to reading. But that's not all you got to read, dude, because guess what? Papal encyclicals are a big deal. And they're up there on the top. I'm not going to get those down. But if you just want to skip, maybe you want to skip past reading all the encyclicals, even though you can't do that because they also contain miles and miles and miles of documents worth of ordinary magisterium, ordinary teaching, which you're also bound by. I mean, I can go get my Leo's encyclicals down, right? I can go get the Popes Against the Modern Error encyclicals, right? But many of those are actually repeated in Denzinger. So just to be nice to you, we could give you the shortcut through Denzinger if you want. So, right, there's 3,000 pages. Let's just take that, right? So let's be nice to you and say, even though you do have to read the papal encyclicals, if you really wanted to be consistent with this position of knowing all of the ordinary teaching, both universal and non-universal, you'd have to read all those things. You have to read the Acts of the Apostolic See. Are you reading it? You better get started. Roman Catholics, if you want to do this consistently, you're going to operate on this principle, you better be reading through these books. Now, as you're reading through these mountains of books here, this whole time, let's say it takes you 2 years to read through, I don't know, these thousands and thousands of pages. We'll say 5,000 pages. And let's say it takes you, I don't know, 2-3 years. Are you sure as you read through these that you understand what you're reading? Don't you have to have kind of a good bit of prior Roman Catholic theology and church history to even understand what's going on in these gigantic books? Well, of course. Okay, so actually you're going to need a lot more time, right? Just to be able to grasp this. So, and by the way, the same would extend to the Protestant too, right? Like, I mean, people that just pick up the Bible, right? They can't understand. And by the way, you can read all these papal documents. Don't you also have to read this one too? Because the papal documents and the church's teachings, what are those? Oh, they're partially interpretations of this, aren't they? So this is the original source document, right? And here's your papal footnotes on that, right? But don't you also kind of have to read some of the church fathers? Oh yeah, but that's another 38 volumes just in the shaft set, right? So you better get to reading, dude. But as the Catholic reads through these, Are you seriously going to tell me that he's not interpreting these texts? I mean, this is literally how they act with this. They act like, no, I'm not interpreting it. I'm just reading it. Dude, are you really? I mean, they don't understand what their position entails, right? It's not just, I just read a few councils and read a few papal dogmas and I've got it figured out, right? It's all in the bag. The papal teaching is in the midst of all of these vast archives and troves of documents. And for you to know it, unless you magically have osmosis, you're going to have to start reading. It basically is going to require a THD or a PhD to say, I understand Catholic theology. But does Roman Catholicism teach that when you get a PhD or a THD, you're infallible? Oh, no. You're an errant, fallible layperson still. Even if you become a priest, even if you teach theology. So the irony of this is that they've completely missed the point and shot themselves in the foot by affirming the classical foundationalist epistemology that is the Roman Catholic epistemology, that I just look at the evidence. This is the approach of Ibarra, right? Just look at the evidence. Just look at church history. What do we see? As if there's not an interpretation of the events and the books and the documents and the liturgy. It's just so inane. It's childish and stupid. So, with that in mind, we understand that this really does not do what it's supposed to do. The whole point of the papacy was the way to resolve these issues, the way to not have the problem of the individual has to reinvent the wheel. But when we come into the last 70 years of Roman Catholicism, post-Vatican II, everything is in chaos. The church is in decline. The church is in a revolution from the top down. Right? I had chili, so I got chili in my teeth. And so the point is just simply that the last 60, 70 years is the greatest testament that the world could ask for to see if this office actually achieves and does what it's supposed to. And so literally every one of those objections of Lofton, of Ibarra about the Orthodox Church, 100-fold comes back on their own head. Because all they do is sit there and say, Orthodox ain't got no way to resolve things. I mean, there was just a schism resolved 2 weeks ago in the news. So how did that occur if there's no way to resolve things? How is it the case, as Ratzinger says, that the Orthodox East has retained the faith for the last 1,000 years? Wait a minute. If we've maintained the faith for the last 1,000 years without the Pope and the office of the Pope, then we don't need the Pope. That's the point, you see. And their whole argument is that we must have the Pope to maintain the faith, to have certainty, to have unity, to have the... How could the Orthodox East maintain the faith without the cornerstone of the faith? It's just ridiculous. And what does Satis Cognitum, which is, of course, one of the famous papal encyclicals about the office of the papacy, what does it say about departing from doctrines? Let's see what Leo XIII says. The practice of the church has always been the same, as is shown in unanimous teaching of the fathers, who were wont to hold outside Catholic communion and alien to the church whoever would recede in the least degree from any point of doctrine proposed by her authoritative magisterium. Epiphanius, Augustine, Theodore drew up long lists of heresies. So did you see that? And then it goes on to say, no one who merely disbelieves in all of these heresies can for that reason call himself a Catholic or himself one. For there maybe arises some new heresy, which is not in this work of ours. And if he holds to one single one of these, he is not a Catholic, quoting St. Augustine. Does that say that I can pick and choose amongst the papal teachings? Now, what did we just read in Denzinger? Denzinger says that you have to believe all of the teachings. What was it, 1689? It said that you can't be, or was it 83? Oh, here's another one. Condemned Proposition 1722. The obligation of Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound is restricted only to the matters proposed by the infallible judgment of the church, believed by all the dogmas. Condemned. Do you understand that's a condemned proposition of the modernist? I am only obliged and bound to what is dogmatic and infallible. Condemned. This is the syllabus of errors. Syllabus of errors is in Denzinger, goobers. Now, if I'm not restricted to ex cathedra as a Roman Catholic, and I have to believe everything that's proposed, including ordinary, including disciplinary matters, including the rights and judgments of the church, then am I a Roman Catholic if I'm condemned by 1722, as 90% of the trads and conservative Novus Ordos are, because they say they don't have to follow Francis's ordinary teaching? Are they Catholics? What does Leo say? The practice of the church, as shown by the unanimous teaching of the fathers, were wont to hold as outside Catholic communion and alien to the church whoever recedes in the least degree from any point of doctrine proposed by the magisterium. And one point of dissent from doctrine makes you not a Catholic. Do you understand? I know some of you Roman Catholics are a little slow. I have to repeat the arguments 10 times sometimes for some of you guys. I know Eric thinks and talks in slow motion. So if you affirm 1722 that you're only bound by what's infallible, as many trads and setas do, then you're condemned because you deny dogma 1722. If I deny dogma 1722 in Denzinger, am I still in the church according to Satis Cognitum? No. It's called ipso facto excommunication.